The first generation CRX was, of course, the beginning. But what was it really? A two-seater, sometimes 3 or 4, 2x2, lightweight variant of the Civic of the same generation. Just that, maybe slightly sportier. The CRX is named after its birth, Civic Renaissance Model X. Renewed or refreshed is what Renaissance means. Since it came along when the Civic was in its third CRX reiteration. The CRX first generation, very sporty looking when compared to the Civic third generation. Some models even came with a rear seat. The second generation CRX was an improvement of its predecessor, a major updated version, with a much more capable suspension that would be considered today's standard for performance, and a powertrain with or without VTEC, single overhead cam or dual overhead cam, that still sees turbo builds today. Anything else with a CR something badge just didn't compare, with the exception of the badass CRV, first gen CRV at least. What followed the second generation CRX was of course the CRX Civic Del Sol. Was the Del Sol named in reference to the sun or the sun? You know, it makes sense. It's, son of God, and God being the CRX, second generation. In all seriousness, the Del Sol was more of a little brother of the hatchback of its generation, the Civic generation. Whereas the second generation CRX was nobody's little brother.
I can handle things, I'm smart! Not like everybody says!
You broke my heart.
The Del Sol had less cargo room when compared to the predecessor, but was also heavier. There wasn't much more room as a driver or passenger, but the Del Sol seats are known to be the lowest OEM Honda seat available. Did you know Enki, Takata, Recaro manufactured parts for OEM Honda? Still, the seats had very similar room for adjustments on the forward end of seat, but not so much on the recline. The selling point for me when it comes to this abomination of a CRX was its cockpit-like interior.
Get the hell out of the cockpit!
You said...
Reminiscent of the S2000 or NSX. I also love the Target Top, but not the one you're thinking of. The US version of the Del Sol did come with the B16A3, which also is a hidden gift from Honda, in my opinion. Put that into the second generation CRX and you've got yourself a JDM CRX almost. That or the B16A2 from the 99-2000 Civic SI, or the B17 from the Integra GSR second generation, or the third generation GSR just for VTECs and giggles, or Type R Integra or Civic Type R for shits and giggles. The Del Sol and Civics of the same generation, 92-95, share suspension similarities to that of the Integra of the 1994-2001 year range. That would mean the suspension of an Integra Type R or Civic Type R 1997-2000 would be a direct bolt-on upgrade to the Del Sol or Civic of the same generation. The Honda Insight. There's 3 generations of the Honda Insight. The Honda Insight, first generation, had a futuristic body style even when compared to today's standards or expectations. Unfortunately, the powertrain option was stacked.
What are you doing, Charles?
Considering you can only buy a hybrid variant. Fortunately, there are ways to add a K-swap to this Robo-Boy, so lots of wiggle room for this chassis still. The Insight was Honda's hiccup as a response to the up-and-coming Prius.
Yo, bitch ass gonna have to wait. I got business going on. Fuck you.
Like a fart of the soul of the second generation HF variants. So the HF no one wants to talk about. We'll have to put that in a whole different upload. The Honda CRZ. You ever heard of those? After we got the Insight, Honda then teased us with a prototype of another potential prior to the existence of what we know now as the CRZ.
Many think the next challenge for green car makers is to give said cars balls. Honda is helping thusly. The CRZ concept. It's reminiscent in name and packaging of the original point-and-shoot pocket rocket, Honda's CRX. Now, this one has a very modern hybrid power plant, but still in a car that is aimed at the same market sector. Low cost, compact, highly tossable.
The CRZ, as much as it might remind those of the CRX body style, was more reminiscent of the Insight, but with 4 wheels exposed. Great. Like the Insight, the K-Swap was the obvious engine of choice, but it never came factory. The CRZ was only in production for 1 generation so far. It too came with a facelift on their later models. The 2nd generation CRX was offered in America as 3 different trim models. The SI, the DX, the HF. One was sporty, one was highly economical, and the other was smack dab in the middle. A medium car, if a car was ever labeled as such. The DX. Yuck! The HF got 45 miles per gallon off the lot and gained even more fuel economy with age. That's the 2nd generation HF. I think the 1st generation HF got some.
The #1 gas mileage car in America.
Just like the PlayStation or the iPhone and Nintendo Switch, vehicles are sold often as pre-facelift models and the facelift model, the later model. Sometimes even more versions of facelifts. The 2nd generation CRX was no exception. However, there are some specificities that make this part a little wonky to absorb. Fanboy content warning. In 1988, while Japan had the CRX SI overseas, it wasn't until 1989 that the CRX SIR, the one with the B16A VTEC, was introduced to Japan, and not us here in the US. All the CRXs around the world had the 1988 door variant, which meant that the seatbelt was mounted from floor to pillar as opposed to floor to door like the ones we got here in the US for the 1989 to 1991 models, with the exception of the 1989 HF. This was due to U.S. highway safety requirements set by the U.S. to accommodate to traffic we are accustomed here.
Shut up! Go back to China, bitch.
As opposed to the roads elsewhere around the world. Right-hand drive versus left-hand drive and headlight angles, stuff like that. The door-mounted seatbelts passed as automatic seatbelts, which was once a requirement, a U.S. requirement as a means of safety at one point. Other than the changes of the aforementioned, there are many other differences between the ones we get here in the US versus the ones the world gets, and life just isn't fair that way. The CRX 2nd generation came with all sorts of options outside of the US, such as full glass top roofs with accessories like a leather cover for that, and a map light to accommodate for the shape of the glass roof. The tan leather interior in the special edition versions of the CRX. And 2-tone paint options from factory for the special edition CRXs. The US also never got the special rear leather seats, or even the cloth ones for that matter. These seats actually came with a seatbelt system for 2 passengers as opposed to none when compared to the rear seat offered in the 1st generation CRX. The 1st generation CRX seats didn't have any seatbelt systems or seatbelts. I think it was just a cushion of some shape. Because most CRX owners prefer to drive alone anyway, most folks who owned a rear seat variant would sell their cars overseas, leading to crushed CRXs when resale became a challenge due to the lack of a rear interior. Also, it came with automatic climate control, and the list just goes on. As far as drivetrain options for outside of the US, there was the single overhead cam ZC, the dual overhead cam ZC, the dual overhead cam VTEC B series. Let me see. Did I say that? Dual overhead cam VTEC B16A and LSD equipped transmissions. In its heyday, the CRX 2nd generation was the preferred version between it and its predecessor due to the slightly larger engine bay and suspension platform. It literally shared the same geometry as the Civic of its generation, making a dual overhead cam swap as simple as putting a factory motor in its place. Power to weight ratio plus cheap equals fun as shit. The second generation CRX has always been cheap enough for the entry-level enthusiast, you and me, to get a chance to be a great competitor, given the power to weight ratio advantage one would have with the chassis. What that means is the CRX is light, and any engine in a lighter car makes it fast. This is especially true when compared to heavier cars, which most cars don't weigh 2,000 pounds like the second generation CRX. You could gut your car and still couldn't come close to the 2,200 pound curb weight that the CRX has, second generation. So people are happy to remove 45 to 110 pounds in order to gain that slight advantage, especially but here's why people are happy to do that to their car, just really briefly. There's a theory out there that states for every 11 pounds shaven, 1 horsepower is gained towards the original peak power. See, what that means is if you took your car to the dyno right now, your horsepower measurement would be under what it's rated due to multiple elements, and weight is a factor. So the amount of weight needed to shave to gain performance over original spec without modifications to the drivetrain, however, would be very questionable when it comes to crash safety. If you take out too much metal from your chassis, cages and harness bars and helmets exist. Also like stitch welding and supplemental metal that people add to their chassis. The second generation CRX was birthed around the time wraparound trim molding was still in style. So BMW, Mercedes, Audi, Toyota, everyone
like
was
my
on the
body?
trim fad.
Then get dieting, exercising, and Trimspy X32. Trimspy, baby!
Civics of newer generations even came with side molding accents, such as the 96 to 98 Civic SIR and the Del Sol, as well as the Integras and other Hondas, of course. This style of design hid protection under the guise of design. Protection you'd expect to get from a bumper, but it would usually wrap around the car and actually protect the bumper as well. Some love it, while others prefer a more simple shaved look, like the Mugen body kit offered for the second gen CRX. This style complicates auto body projects and can turn a single tone paint job into a lazy attempt at renewing a classic style, especially when done poorly. Speaking of side trims, the CRX 2nd Gen received a facelift midway its existence from 1990 to 1991. Speaking of side trims, the 2nd Gen CRX received a facelift midway its existence from 1990 to 1991. That's true for the US version and the Japanese model, or EDM model, or anywhere else around the world. The trim change was a slimmer, more slender look on the wraparound molding itself, paired with an integrated rear lip on the rear bumper and air dams in the front bumper, plus hidden fasteners for the corner lights and bumper lights, as well as the size and shape of the bumper lights. Other changes included seating mounts, interior styling, color options, and a few other things. So side note, the wagon of the 1988 to 1988 Shut up! The wagon of the 1988 to 1991 Civic generation remained in production until 1996 in countries outside of the US. The wagon sedan of this generation was offered in real-time all-wheel drive variants. These components can be modified to fit the CRX or Civic hatchback with modifications. The first generation CR-V also came with a dual overhead cam non-VTEC powertrain with real-time all-wheel drive options as well, manual and automatic transmissions. These components can be used on the CRX and Civic platforms with modifications. Honda kind of snuck in the CRX for the consumer to get a taste of VTEC. People may argue this fact, but the second generation CRX was the last of its kind. Proof is in the aftermarket support available today. Out of all the EFs, the CRX is by far the more rare variant. Was that by accident? Did Soichiro Honda do that on purpose? Kind of evil. No, it's not. It was a gift, like I said from the beginning. When the second generation CRX debuted in the United States, its initial sticker price was around $8,500 to $12,000. So not until recently has the CRX ever received a price tag of just under $50,000 for a low mileage one owner variant. That's a huge jump, but still, the economy hasn't caught up to where the market is supposed to be, even currently. To make this more mentally stable, we have to cover other models offered by Honda. Models such as the S2000 and its predecessors. Also, the Civic and its predecessors. Honda's racing history, the birth of VTEC, a lot of stuff like that, but we're not going to go through all of that in this upload. Here's another side note about engine swaps, if you didn't already know this. So if you didn't already know this, you could practically fit any engine into any car you desire, provided that you don't mind the modifications necessary to accommodate such a goal. So that's what an engine swap is, if you ever hear that terminology being tossed around. In other words, things can be as complicated as you can dream, or as simple as removing the old engine for one that fits just the same but with more power without any major modifications requirement for the fitment. So there's plenty of good information out there about the S2000. They have a special place in my heart. So if you want my variation on this Honda oddity, let me know in the comments. But just briefly, the S2000 is big brother to the Del Sol. With its capabilities aside, the S2000 was derived from the S800, S600, S500, S360. The S600M was a race version of the S600. I don't know if you knew this, okay? It probably came, I'm not too sure, I don't know too much about this car, but it probably came with so many race upgrades. One notable feature was the quick release style seat rails for the passenger seats, making it easy for the removal of the passenger seat for weekend lap times at the track. That was made by Honda. They fucking made a car where you could fucking remove the seat so it could be lighter and you could fucking get faster lap times. What the fuck do you think about that? So of course not many of these made it into the American market, whether they were designed to be or not. This car was not ever reintroduced into the market until 2000 for the S2000, of course. So if Honda made a car such as the S600M or even the S2000 CR, someone explained to me why the CRX is the only model Honda chose to make a special edition version. Think about it. The relationship that the second generation CRX had with Mugen was a very close one, and it's quite evident when looking at a Mugen catalog for the Gen 2 CRX. Sheesh, indeed. Definition of CRX in math, I already said that's a meme portion I gotta squeeze in there. So let me end this by saying this. The CRX is an iconic car on its own, just like the Toyota A86, the Nissan's S chassis, Mazda's RX-7, but the CRX's price has always been looked at as a joke from the very beginning. Some of these iconic cars are restored by hand, painstakingly, for the sake of not only preservation, but more than proper fitment, even better than what the factory had to offer. The second generation CRX is aging, and the economy is not currently aligned with what its true potential value is. With what's left on the market, rear quarter rust, amongst other known issues, are only becoming more commonplace. While Toyota 886's chassis can be had brand new, built from China, Honda still has yet to catch up in that regards in the aftermarket scene. We still have to get rear quarter panels from CRX farm, so there's plenty of room in the collection market of golden era Hondas, CRX definitely included.